So here we go. First, we'll do Ashley Rose. And she says, hoping third time's a charm. That's why I took it. Good evening, Bill. As two aspiring clinical psychologists, Jake Sorticus and I are increasingly terrified of the current state of both academia and the field of psychology as a whole. This is especially the case in light of the recent guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men from the APA. I know this story. I haven't read the rest of it, but I know exactly where you're going with it. As individuals who want to help people and who feel as though we are standing in front of an avalanche trying to prevent it alone, we faced a great amount of doubt. We're wondering, do you think there's any hope for the field of psychology? Do we need to pursue other routes completely disconnected from academia? We know academia may be lost, but we still believe in the utility of clinical training and practice, which unfortunately come through higher education in psychology. Thanks and warm regards from us both. Ashley, that was a lovely letter. Thank you, and best to Jake as well. So, yes, there's hope, and it was clarified for me over the weekend. It's something I've been hanging on to, but it became much clearer for me over the weekend. So I'll back up a little bit and tell you some of the backstory in a second. First of all, psychologists are absolutely essential. A good therapeutic psychologist is the difference between living and dying for some people, and I'm one of them. I'm here today because of two psychologists, and I really mean that. I'm not saying I would have, jumped off a bridge, but I wouldn't be in this chair, and that's for damn sure. If it hadn't been for two exceptional psychologists and now kind of a third one, hypnotherapist, who's really helping me. So, so what you do is absolutely essential, and it can't go away. On a related note, I think that academia, as we understand it, is finished. I think that brick and mortar universities are finished. I think they're done. I think that their reputation has been irretrievably damaged, and that there's so much, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the perfect word too. What is it? It's not dreck, but it's something like dreck, gunk, whatever. There's so much gunk and dreck in the pipeline that it's going to be years and years and years of getting worse before it starts to get better. And I frankly think it's done. I just think it's over. Colleges have become the place where you go to ensure that you don't learn anything. Now you go to college to make sure that under no circumstances do you hear opposing points of view. That's what college is now. And so since the left took over, this is what the left does. And I saw this, I think Iowa Hawk did a tweet on it. I think I saw it this morning in Instapundit. The left does basically this: find a respected institution, occupy it, destroy it, and then walk around wearing its skin and demand apologies if anybody dares to call you on it. So that's bad news. The good news is, Ashley, that is that you, just as, and also because it's part of the same kind of social evolution, but just as the brick and mortar universities are becoming absolutely irrelevant, so too is the internet's ability to educate people to extremely high levels, starting to evolve and improve. And you may not like the sound of this, but I would get used to it if you're anybody. I'd get used to this. I've been living a gig-based life for pretty much the last 30 years, maybe more. And what I mean by that is, if you're interested in working in show business, it's for most of the time it was virtually impossible. Lately, it has become essentially impossible that you would find lifelong work. So when you work in show business, you are prepared to work on a gig basis, and it's extremely uncomfortable emotionally. It's hard. It's really hard on you, and the reason it's hard on you is because there's no certainty. You can't plan on anything. You don't have any idea what your income is going to be. You've gotten a job, okay, that's good, and it's a good job, and it's paying pretty well. That's good too. And how long is it going to last? Oh, 3 weeks. Okay, I better be looking for something after that. Or worse, you think it's going to last a year or 2 years, and then they cancel it mid-season. And almost as bad as that is where I was at when I was editing Sunday Morning Shootout for 5 years. I ended up being employed for 5 years, which is lifetime employment. I mean, it's eternal salvation in show business to have the same job for 5 years. But the problem with having that job for 5 years was only that I didn't know I was going to have it for 5 years. I had a 3-month job for 5 years, meaning every 3 months we would find out whether we were still afloat or not, and you couldn't plan on it. And it's pretty tough. But with that said, I suspect that all of the kind of traditional, I would say, let's just say accreditation and licensing mechanisms, I think they're kind of on their way out. I think all of this stuff is on the way out. In some cases it's good news, some cases it's not, but I wouldn't be surprised that if in 10 years or so, maybe less, people like you were not working directly with patients who come to you through, I don't know if they should say through social media, but come to you through internet connections. And that before too much longer, the academic credentials may be completely, essentially ignored, and you will get retain and get new patients based on a system very much like eBay, very much like she is a 5-star psychologist. Cannot recommend her highly enough. You're going to Yelp your way into the world. There's no question, none, that that this is not the kind of thing that you can just go out and do. Same with engineering. You can't just go out and start engineering if you're going to be building bridges. You can go and play around with things. It's a good start. But things like doctors and so on, you need an extremely intense education for a very long period of time. But that doesn't necessarily have to happen in a university. It probably better to happen when you have 1 or 2 people in the same study group. But homeschooling, you could have made the case maybe that a homeschool kid didn't know more than a kid who was educated in a British school like I was in the 1960s, because that was an unbelievably rigorous and structured education. But there's absolutely no question, and I mean none, that homeschooled kids are infinitely smarter, and not just more educated, smarter than the rest of the kids. So I think your chance of I don't think psychologists are going away. On the contrary, if you are wondering what to do with your life, I would either go into the medical profession or the psychiatric care profession, because when these millennials, who through no fault of their own, they didn't pick their own educational standards, but when the people who take care of them begin to die, there's going to be a generation-wide nervous breakdown. I just have no doubt of it. If your entire life you've been get the participation trophy, and you've never been allowed to fail, and you've never been allowed to succeed, and you go looking for your safe space when you hear something that might offend you, that is arrested development. It's a generational neurosis, and they are going to hit ground, and they're going to hit ground hard, and hard when they begin to realize that there's no longer anybody to protect them. I've heard anecdotally that there's stories of psychologists now who are starting to see people in their late 30s and 40s who are coming to them and having essentially panic attacks because they don't know how to do their laundry. They're 35, 40-year-old woman. She doesn't know how to do the laundry, and she needs to have clothes cleaned, and she doesn't know how to do it. Not only does she not know how to do it, that's easy to learn. If you can teach a college bachelor how to do his laundry, for God's sake, you can teach anybody. So it's not that she can't learn how to do it. It's that it's too much for her emotionally. It's just too big. It's too big of a burden. Doing your laundry is they can't handle it. It's too stressful. So yes, we're going to be needing a lot of psychologists. We're going to need armies of psychologists. And I just thought of something clever. I was just thinking of something very clever. You could even say that the crisis is going to become so severe that you're going to need to parachute into cities, in which case you'd be a parapsychologist. But anyway, so there's that. But now to the main issue. What Ashley and Jake were referring to is that some of the latest guidelines from the American Psychiatric Association has recently basically said that anything that you would consider to be a masculine trait is essentially a disorder. And masculinity, as it's understood by all of us, is a mental illness. That's what they're saying. They're saying that toxic masculinity, which means things like holding doors for women and not crying when there's a car accident and people need help, and courage, all those things. That all of these things are psychologies. They're disorders, psychiatric disorders. And when you find out what the consequences are, they'll say one of the many harmful effects of traditional masculinity are things like risk-taking, competition. All of these things are looked at as horrible outcomes, and stifling of boys' emotional states. In other words, boys are defective girls, and we've got to teach them that right away, and we've got to make sure that they're as hysterical as young women are, and we've got to make sure that whatever they do, they don't follow their own instincts. So all of this up to this point is bad news, except for the part of not needing to go to college to get a college education. But here's the thing that I think will help you, Ashley and Jake, and maybe the rest of you. And I got it very clearly just this last weekend. I was pitching the Aurora Project to my favorite group down in Ramona, California. It's out in the country, small group of people. I just love the venue. I love the space. I love the people. It's just my favorite event. And I was talking once again about how this generation of young men are abandoning the world that we live in to go to live in a world where they get to act like conservatives, where the reason so many young men are addicted to computer games is because they're addicted to freedom. They're addicted to being heroic. They like to drive fast and blow things up, and they like to shoot things, and they like to get the pat on the back from their friends, and they like to work together as a team, but not be together as a collective, and so on and so on and so on. And that's when it occurred to me that this is in fact the entire essence of conservatism. And if you want to put it in a nutshell, Ashley, what I said to those people down there was, no matter how hard you try, you cannot beat the biology out of people. You cannot beat the biology out of people. If you tell young men to be young women, and if you make it so unpleasant for them to do anything that they feel is they're naturally inclined to do, without father figures and strong fathers to basically, tell these feminists to just, hey, that's enough. That's enough of this nonsense. Son, you don't have to listen to this lunatic, this neurotic. You can't beat the biology out of people. And this generation that's in college now has been brutalized by the left, and has had the left determined to beat the biology out of people, which is why they're going into the world of Star Wars and Star Trek and computer games and Doctor Who. They're bringing their ideology into the places where these young men have escaped from, and they're trying to track them down and kill them. That's why there's so much rage towards the left now. Rage, incandescent rage. When I was answering questions on that one, Ashley, somebody said, "Okay, well that's for guys. I mean, what do you have for women?" And I said, "Well, first of all, there's a significant number of women who play computer games and so on. But let's put that aside. Not really talking about reaching them." I said, what I'm doing is we're getting the women back to our side by producing better men, because you can't beat the biology out of people. I saw a study not too long ago, I want to say a week ago, 10 days ago, where they basically interviewed ultra-feminist social justice warriors, young women, the absolute far left screaming Antifa lunatics. And they asked these young women what they thought about feminist men. And it turns out they didn't have a very high opinion of them at all. You know? They didn't like them. They didn't want to date them. Weren't interested in them in any way, except as perhaps another sign to be carried in a protest. And almost all, whether they know it or not, I suspect they don't know it, but a significant portion, I'd say an easy majority of the feminist men out there are feminists because they think it's the way that they're going to get laid. They think, okay, so the women are feminists, I'll be a feminist too. And next thing you know, ta-da. I was going to say we're making out in the back seat of the car, but they don't have cars, so maybe they take an Uber out to some field or something. So what that meant was, and the additional study went on to confirm this apparently, was that even the young women who are shrieking the most about the patriarchy, screaming about microaggressions, mansplaining, manspreading, all of this, all of it, the ones that just cannot stop talking about how evil and awful men are, find that the men that agree with them to be weak and pointless and silly, which is telling me they are attracted to guys who are the same kind of guys that women have always been attracted to. You know, what these feminists are doing, these social justice warriors are doing, the males, is they're basically taking the strategy of, well, sure, she's going out with a football player, but if I do all her homework for her and I'm at her beck and call 24 hours a day, then she'll definitely have the hots for me. Doesn't work that way. And so the good news here is what I said earlier. You can't beat the biology out of men, and you can't beat the biology out of women either. They cannot control it. They can, in their heads, do everything they want to, dedicate every waking hour to destroying this idea of strong men, but the reason that they're so obsessed with destroying strong men is because they know that strong men have something that they don't have. And it's not the biological pieces. They can't handle the fact that men are capable of a different way of thinking, that they are not as subject to their emotions, at least not if they're raised correctly, and they're able to women connect everything to everything else. Everything's connected to everything else. Men can simply just deal with the problem. I've mentioned it a few times before. It is one of the most important things I ever saw. Somebody could probably figure it out, get a link up there for me, but it was a discussion that a psychologist was having, and he came out on stage and he had a man's head and a woman's head, like a plaster bust of them, and he said, "Okay, so let's talk about the male mind," and he stands behind the male head and he said, "The male mind is like a tackle box that you have when you go fishing. It's made up of all these little drawers, and inside a drawer are individual things, and there's bunches of drawers. And the way that men think is they'll think, okay, I'm going to open up the paycheck drawer or the job drawer, and I'm going to think about my job and my paycheck, and I'm going to worry about this or the money or whatever I need on budget. I'm going to close that drawer, and then I'm going to open up my drawer that deals with my wife, and I'm going to close that drawer, and I'm going to open up the door that deals with what's going on with football." And that you think of these things sequentially, and you open a drawer, you look at it, you think about it, put it back, and then you move on to the next thing. And he had the incredible insight to say, and ladies, the thing that's going to surprise you the most is the drawer that the men spend most of their time in doesn't have anything in it. And all the women laugh and titter, "Ha, ha, 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 men are so stupid, ha, ha, ha." That's not what he's saying. He's saying that men have an ability to just check out of the emotions of it. We don't have to be slaves to it. We can simply say, "I'll deal with that later." And that's an incredible, unbelievable advantage. It's an unbelievable advantage. And since we don't see things as all connected to each other. And since we're dealing with things one box at a time, and I'm speaking in generalizations, obviously, but they're strong generalizations, men have the ability to kind of bore down onto a problem, whether it's making the perfect fly fishing lure or building a fusion reactor. They have the ability to bore down on it because there are no distractions. There's nothing else pulling their attention. They are on this project. They're going to build this spaceship. They're gonna dig this tunnel. They're gonna go on this mission, whatever. And that's what they think about. And nothing gets in the way of that. So that's how men think, according to this guy. Then he walks over to the other side of the stage, and he said, "No, let's talk about how women think." I said, men's brains are like little boxes that they open and close. He said, a woman's brain is like a ball of wire, just a giant ball of copper wire through which electricity passes, and everything touches everything else. Everything's connected to everything, and all the time. And so when a man decides that maybe we're going to go over to our friend's house for dinner, the guy throws on a pair of shoes and maybe pants that don't have a hole in it and a T-shirt that's not been in the hamper for more than a day or two. But because that's all he cares about. He's got to be close so he doesn't get arrested. He's not going there to be looked at for fashions. He doesn't give a hell. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to us. Looks like Astronerd's got it up there in the comment section here. But he was saying, but a woman, when she dresses for the dinner, is thinking about things like this. Susie is a little overweight, so I don't want to wear anything that makes me look much thinner than her. And plus, George is in some trouble of being laid off. I know because I spoke to her about it last night. And I don't want to dress too rich, or I certainly don't want to look like we're making more money than them. And at the same time, I don't really want to dress down for them. So I got to think about something that just seems casual enough, but respectful enough. And I want to and just on and on and on. And I hear this thing, and it's like, man, that's just terrible. Wow. But it makes sense. I mean, all of it makes sense. These traditional roles make sense because if you're going to be out there for 3 days with a sharp stick, crapping in the woods, trying to find a elephant to bring down and take home, that requires a different skill set than people who are either staying at home and building things and communicating with each other and constantly taking care of not just the children but all of the social connections. You would develop 2 different brains like that. So, a long answer to a very good question. The reason I am less worried than I used to be, I'm not worried. The reason I'm less worried than I used to be that they are going to be able to define masculinity and all of these traditional values away, just define them away and program people into being what they are. I've come to realize that all the evidence is against that. That you cannot beat the biology out of people. That men are going to want to do men things, women are going to want to do women things. And when I said to that woman who asked the question, what are you going to do for young women? I said, at the very least, we're going to make better men for them. All the women just cheered and applauded. They certainly need better men, and the men need better women too. I don't know why this has to be viewed as a contest or a zero-sum game or something. It's like, well, the men win or the women win. It's just nuts. It's just they're different, and some people are good at some things and some people are good at other things. And doesn't restrict you to an occupation or anything. I mean, I'm good at talking, not so good at bookkeeping. And I don't consider that to be a contest. It's just proclivities and stuff. But if you try to fight them, and you have to destroy them if you're going to be a progressive, the idea that a man can run faster than a woman is not allowed. It's not only not allowed, it can't be true. And anybody who says it's true must be destroyed. Just ask Martina Navratilova about that. So, the good news is sometimes the worse it gets, the better it gets. I did not think I would see this generation of millennials and younger take up arms against the left. I thought they'd be completely, 4 or 5 generations now, be completely brainwashed into being, all of them being social justice warriors. But turns out that as usual, they've overplayed their hand, and I think I think Jordan Peterson is great data on the fact that people are ready to have somebody just come out and speak the truth about this. Give men permission to be men. And Eric says that women are better at the gun range. Certainly my woman is. I don't know whether she'd be better in a full-on firefight. But she is death on wheels with her 22. She outshot the Beretta. I got her in a month and had to get her a Buckmark competition pistol because she was so much better than the gun was. And in target practice, pretty much using pretty much any weapon, she's a much better shot than I am. I'm a decent shot. I'm not a bad shot, but she's a much better shot, Natasha. Much better. And she always argues with me about it, and I say, honey, it's not something that I'm ashamed of, something I'm proud of. You're a much better shot than me, and you've never picked up a gun before, but a year and a half ago. And she says it's because she's a photographer, and she has to keep things perfectly still and look down the sight line and all the rest of it. May be true, maybe not. But, and by the way, I'm not when I'm bouncing millennials, I'm obviously talking about the social justice warriors. The military, you've heard me speak about the military earlier. Eric said, don't forget we fought Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So you did. You not only fought Al-Qaeda and ISIS, a lot of older millennials kicked the living crap out of Iraq and Afghanistan and all the rest of those bad people. So I'm obviously not talking about them. I'm talking about the culture as a whole. So yes, Natasha's a much better shot than I am at a shooting range. Now, whether she's as good a shot as I am if somebody's shooting back, that is still an open question, one that I hope we don't ever have to settle. But I have a suspicion about it. So there you go, right? There you go. 105-pound Navy jet mechanic trying to torque a prop out piece. Leolis is saying 105-pound Navy jet mechanic trying to torque a prop nut onto a P3 Orion does a full pull-up on the wrench, pulls on the wrench as hard as possible, and she doesn't weigh enough to actually turn the wrench to a sufficient torque level. Well, that nut doesn't care who put it on, and that nut doesn't care the intentions of the people that put it on. That nut only cares about whether or not it is torqued sufficiently to stay on and keep the propeller on board during the vibrations you encounter in flight. And it doesn't care who put it on. It needs to know, is it torqued to an adequate tightness or is it not? And if it's not, then it's going to come off. And if it comes off, people are going to probably get killed. And I don't like to see people get killed because other people insist that a 105-pound woman be able to apply 200 foot-pounds of torque. It's just insane. And the last one we will do,